I'm in one of the greatest cities on earth, and my personal favourite city in Europe, Berlin, Germany. A city where its history is tangible. A city of great nightlife, museums, architecture, and a rich history of cinema. I thought I would go through how the city has been represented on the big screen. I'm wearing this mask because I'm not actually speaking. I don't want to be some annoying loud insalafen, so if my eyebrows don't match what I'm saying, that's why. Let's go back to the 1920s, where Germany was the world leader in inventive cinema. And if you just want to get an idea of what Berlin looked like in the Weimar Republic, then Berlin's Symphony of a Metropolis is for you. This is a city symphony. It's sort of like a documentary, just a montage of the streets of Berlin. Another film that shows off the streets at the time is People on Sunday, shot in 1929 over Sundays with amateur actors playing characters doing their actual day jobs, such as taxi drivers and wine sellers. The script was an early effort from Billy Wilder before he fled Europe. These films are truly wonderful time capsules, because by the end of World War II, over 30% of the city was destroyed. Many of the buildings seen here would not be around for much longer. During the Weimar Republic, around 250 films a year were being made in Germany, where filmmakers started experimenting with design and lighting, and one of the results was German expressionism. This artistic movement didn't try to display the world in a realistic way, instead having the director's emotions come to the foreground. Realism was out, and expressive, strange, distorted sets and worlds were in. One of the masters of this form, and indeed of cinema in general, was Fritz Lang. And let's start with a character who will appear a few times in this video, the mysterious criminal, Dr. Mabuse. We see him for the first time in 1922's Dr. Mabuse the Gambler, a two-part, 4.5-hour extravaganza. In it we follow the villainous doctor, a master criminal who uses disguises, hypnosis, and plenty of goons and weapons to trick people out of their cash. The film deals with the troubles German society was facing after the end of World War I. Hyperinflation led to printing more and more money until the Deutschmark became nearly worthless. And in this film, Mabuse creates counterfeit money and even creates stock market turmoil to his own advantage. Mabuse here is a character that sums up all the problems facing Weimar Republic Germany. We see the extremely poor in the film struggling to get by, as well as the wealthy gambling in illegal dens, showing off Berlin's nightlife, which is an important part of the city, and how it has always been represented on the big screen. No matter how bad things get here, the party never stops. Another type of film in the Weimar years was the Kammerspiel, or chamber drama. Far less visually audacious films that focus on the lower classes and the struggles they face. Another master of 1920s German cinema was F.W. Murnau, who had made the first excellent adaptation of Dracula in the shape of Nosferatu in 1922, and 2 years later made one of the great Kammerspiel movies, The Last Laugh. The film stars Emil Jannings, more on him later in the video, as an elderly doorman of a fancy hotel. He finds pride in his work, but his life and reputation are shattered when the manager demotes him to a washroom attendant. Everything goes wrong for the poor doorman. But eventually the film's one and only title card tells us that in real life this is where the story would end, but that the author has taken pity and written a happy ending. We then get a nonsense final act, where the former doorman is left millions by a kind rich man who died in his arms after taking a crap. Our protagonist is now a man who can fill his face with food and share his wealth with those around him. Indeed, in the Weimar Republic, the petty bourgeois were looking for a way out, so the film gives some fake hope for the audience. The film was also incredibly innovative and influential with its use of camera movement. While Germany was struggling financially, it was really ahead of most other countries in the world of cinema. Other films of the Weimar Republic about people struggling include Asphalt, where a jewel thief attempts to seduce a policeman who catches her. And my personal favourite film of that period is George Wilhelm Pabst's Pandora's Box, featuring one of the greatest performances in history, Louise Brooks as Lulu, a wild party girl who it all goes wrong for. One of the most important books written during and dealing with the Weimar Republic was Alfred Doblin's 1929 masterpiece, Berlin-Alexanderplatz. It was adapted into a film in 1931, but the best adaptation came in the form of a TV show of cinematic qualities, with one of the great German directors behind it, Rainer Werner Fassbinder, who adapted it into a 14-part miniseries that was released theatrically in the States. Yet again we have someone struggling in the chaos of the Weimar Republic. This time a former convict who is released from prison but can't escape a life of crime and poverty due to the nature of the city in this period. His life becomes an unescapable nightmare. In many ways our protagonist is Berlin itself, struggling with a violent nature and getting madder and madder. And now is a good time to enter the 1930s and get back to the master Fritz Lang. In 1931 he released M. Lang clearly hated the Weimar Republic and the nightmare of the streets of Berlin. In this we have a police procedural where Inspector Karl Lohmann is trying to capture a child killer, played by the wonderfully creepy Peter Lorre. It even features Lang's take on the Ringverein, the criminal gangs working in the underworld of Berlin. In 1933, Inspector Lohmann would return, but now chasing down a familiar criminal. Yes, Fritz Lang would bring back the dastardly Dr. Mabuse. But now, Dr. Mabuse stood for a different type of evil. Yes, through this sequel, Lang would deal with a new rising threat. The threat of the Nazi Party. Yes, now Dr. Mabuse is a stand-in for Hitler and even uses some Nazi slogans and doctrines.
Der letzte Sinn des Verbrechens ist, eine unbeschränkte Herrschaft des Verbrechens aufzurichten. Einen Zustand vollkommener Unsicherheit und Anarchie, aufgebaut auf den zerstörenden Idealen einer Welt, die zum Untergang verurteilt ist.
But 1933 wasn't the ideal time for the film's release, because yes, the Nazis were now in control, and the new Minister of Propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, asked for a meeting with Lang. He loved Lang's style, and even though Lang had Jewish blood, Goebbels wanted him to make films for the Third Reich. Lang fled to Paris that night. Many great filmmakers fled Europe at this point. Lang, Billy Wilder, Fred Zinnemann and Otto Preminger, to name a few. Yes, Germany and Berlin was entering a newer, even more bleak period, and one of the best films to capture this change was Bob Fosse's 1972 masterpiece Cabaret, based on the stage musical of the same name, which was based on Christopher Isherwood's fabulous book Goodbye to Berlin, about his days living in Berlin during this period. The film shows the move from the hedonistic bohemian party scene in the Weimar Republic to growing nationalism. This is my favourite musical. Shot in West Berlin, this captured the feeling of the city in that time superbly. It does a marvellous job of showing the joys of the cabaret, along with the mess of people's private lives, as well as the terrifying changes and rise of fascism in the country. Liza Minnelli is marvellous as international sensation Sally Bowles. And this is the bridge where she used to love to scream as trains passed over. Joel Grey nearly steals the film as the MC. He is funny and even a little frightening as the host who doesn't really have a character, but he smiles and entertains anyone who is willing to pay. And seeing his humour become more and more anti-Semitic as the film progresses is a wonderful way of showing changing attitudes in the country.
She wouldn't look Jewish at all.
It's a tremendous film that is a look at Germany falling into the hands of evil. Yes, the Nazis were in power now, and maybe the most notable footage of this early period of their rule was the 1938 propaganda documentary from Leni Riefenstahl, Olympia, about the 1936 Summer Olympics held here at the Olympic Stadium in Berlin. Even though this is a piece of propaganda for Nazi Germany, a hero of sports really showed how stupid their ideals of the superior race were. Yes, in front of Hitler, Jesse Owens won 4 gold medals, breaking Olympic records for each win.
Weltrekord!
And now times are about to get darker and darker indeed. And I thought I would quickly talk about a film not set in Berlin, but one that shows how people would have very different fates in this new, frightening world. Through the cast of the 1930 classic The Blue Angel, we see people's paths dividing. Emil Jannings, who I talked about before, was the first Oscar winner. And here he plays a professor who is led astray with an obsession for a showgirl, played by one of the most iconic German actresses of all time, Marlene Dietrich, who works as part of a troupe managed by a magician played by Kurt Geron. Well, in the 30s, these 3 actors would have very different fates indeed. Dietrich had strong political views, and in the late 30s helped Jewish people escape Germany. Her entire salary for Night Without Armour went on helping refugees. She was one of the first stars to raise war bonds and toured and played for the Allied troops throughout the war. And she was awarded the Medal of Freedom for her work by Harry S. Truman in 1945. Meanwhile, Emil Jannings made Nazi propaganda films for Goebbels. Dietrich loathed Jannings for his friendship and work with the Nazi Party, and she called him a ham. I can think of a few harsher words to describe him. Apparently, at the end of World War II, as Allied troops marched into Berlin, Jannings ran towards them holding his Best Actor award, yelling, "Don't shoot! I have won an Oscar!" He wasn't imprisoned, but he never worked again. Kurt Geron, being Jewish, left Germany in 1933 and settled in Amsterdam. When the Nazis occupied the Netherlands, he was taken to a concentration camp and was forced to perform for the SS and later to make a propaganda film. Once filming had wrapped on it, he and his wife were put on a train to Auschwitz and died in the gas chambers in 1944. 3 Germans who had 3 very different fates in those years. And it's a good example of how the first country the Nazis took over was Germany. While the Nazis were in power, it wasn't just people that suffered, but German culture as well, and German cinema, with so many filmmakers leaving and there being no artistic freedom. This was a period of banning anything that didn't toe the line, and books were being burnt, which was shown in Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, where Jones witnesses mass book burning and even comes face to face with evil itself. And now we enter our 3rd chapter, and let's have Mel Brooks as Hitler rapping explain.
All those mothers in the fatherland. I said, dude, baby, I got me a plan. I said, what you got, Adolf? What you gonna do? I said, how about this one? World War II!
Yes, with the invasion of Poland, the deadliest conflict in human history began. There are endless films about World War II, with Berlin appearing in many. In Valkyrie, Tom Cruise fails to kill Hitler. In Inglourious Bastards, Tarantino succeeds. But how was Berlin shown? Well, Tinto Brass tried to recapture the magic of Cabaret, but with plenty more nudity, in 1976's Salon Kitty, an erotic war film based on the fascinating real events of the Salon Kitty operation, where the Nazis took control of an infamous luxury brothel in Berlin, wiretapping it and filling it with female spies to get information from high-ranking customers. Unfortunately, the film goes out of its way to shock and titillate rather than tell this true historical espionage story properly, and it can be seen as an early example of the remarkably distasteful genre which is Nazi exploitation, where after the success of this movie, many others, with many Italian directors, used real-life crimes to make films that were meant to be enjoyed. But there was one film made this century that captured the last days in Berlin before the fall of Hitler superbly. 2004's Downfall. A riveting portrayal of Hitler's final days, where he was held up in his bunker that used to be here in this car park. Set in 1945 during the Battle of Berlin, where the writing was on the wall for Nazi Germany, we follow Hitler as he is held up in his bunker. Bruno Ganz stars as the real-life villain, and is simply superb. He is at his wit's end, a shaking, nervous, furious mess who at any time can boil over into utter rage. He is a hideous man to his core, but this film also shows that he had the ability to charm. Of course, this was needed. He needed that skill to win the people over. Some people felt it humanized Hitler too much, but I actually think this is important. These weren't comic book villains. This sort of evil can exist in real men. You see that bastard as a three-dimensional person, but never do you feel for him or even begin to empathize. He is a monster, but one who really existed. This is a man who would play a compliment to a lady or a child and minutes later order the deaths of countless people. He is of course the center of the film, but the screenplay brilliantly has his secretary as the character who takes us into this tense, miserable world, as she is hired and goes into the bunker with that bastard. The tension in that underground layer is tangible, but the Berlin streets under assault are also brilliantly captured. This is a film with so many historical details and research that it totally takes you back to that time only 80 years ago. This is a very powerful piece of cinema about one of the worst people who ever lived. But for footage of the fall of Berlin, maybe the best film is the Soviet documentary Fall of Berlin 1945. It even follows the detachment of the Red Army that assaulted the Reichstag and finally hoisted the red flag atop the building. The film puts the focus on the Russian people as the heroes of the war, but 5 years later there was another film with a very similar title, The Fall of Berlin, a Soviet propaganda film that was shot in East Berlin, but tried to say that there was one true hero, an architect behind the defeat of the Nazis. Yes, in this film, the hero that saved the world was Stalin. The film was made as a gift to Stalin for his 70th birthday and was made at the height of Stalin's cult of personality. At the end of World War II, Berlin was in rubble, but it was now a divided city and would remain so for decades. And this divided city would be represented in many different films. And a new genre came about in Europe. The rubble film. Filmed amongst the damaged, destroyed cities of Western and Eastern Europe, the characters inhabiting these worlds are equally damaged and destroyed. And maybe the best film to capture Berlin immediately post-World War II and the struggle its inhabitants faced was Roberto Rossellini's neo-realist masterpiece, Germany Year Zero, being the last part of his unofficial war trilogy, following the Italian set Rome Open City and Pisa. This takes place in Berlin during the Allied occupation of Germany. Rossellini used mostly local, non-professional actors and actually filmed on the bombed-out streets, showing the devastation that war had brought to the city. We see the hardship of life through the eyes of a child. We follow a German boy struggling to survive. The footage of the streets is fascinating, and what is fantastic is that a film made just a few years after the end of the war isn't showing the Germans as 2D villains. This is showing the German victims of the Nazis, the people dragged into war, the children, the elderly, the innocents of the city whose lives were also devastated. The children in this film are all suffering, and of course, a happy ending is not in store. It's a tough film to watch, but an important one. It was released in 1948, as was a far lighter take on the times. With Foreign Affair, both Billy Wilder and Marlene Dietrich were back in Berlin, this time for a romantic comedy set among the burnt-out streets. While serving in the army, Wilder thought this city would be a perfect location for a film. Wilder got the hilarious Jean Arthur out of retirement to play a prim and proper member of a congressional committee sent to Berlin to assess the morale of the American troops posted there. She finds a corrupt city, full of soldiers trading chocolate and cigarettes for nights with women. One German nightclub singer, who had close ties to the Nazi party, is having an affair with an American soldier. Arthur is determined to find out who it is. She gets the help of Captain John Pringle to find the man, not knowing that he is the man himself. It's very funny, and of course, Marlene Dietrich is hypnotic as the singer.
You buy these goods, and boy, these goods are keen.
Another example of the Rubble film is The Murderers Are Among Us, where we follow a former military sergeant who is now a drunk. He makes friends with a female survivor of a concentration camp. He is intent on killing his former Nazi sergeant, but she insists he goes to court for his crimes. This film and others like it were encouraged by the Americans and Soviets in the country who wanted to denazify it.
Hauptmann Brückner?
Hauptmann? Wieso Hauptmann?
Erinnern Sie sich noch?
Erinnern? Ach, Menschenskind. Ich denke so oft an die goldenen Tage der Freiheit im grauen Rock.
Gehen Sie.
Was haben Sie?
Gar nichts.
Ich habe plötzlich wie verwandelt. Merkwürdig.
Bin ich denn?
Maybe the greatest Rubble film of all time doesn't actually take place in Berlin. Carol Reed's The Third Man, which is set in Vienna. But Reed did make a Rubble film in Berlin too, The Man Between, where a British woman gets caught up in a spy plot and struggles to get out of the Eastern Bloc with James Mason doing a German accent. A more satirical look came in The Berliner, featuring Goldfinger himself, Gert Frobe, in his first starring role as a normal man returning from the war and trying to make it. The character's name is Otto Normalweltbracker, which has since become a German term for the average Joe.
Yeah.
And Gert Frobe would return in the 1960s, where the world was a very different place. But you can still count on one devious bastard to turn up. Yes, in 1960, Dr. Mabuse returned in The Thousand Eyes of Dr. Mabuse, Fritz Lang's final Mabuse film, which also turned out to be his final film. Mabuse may have had 1,000 eyes, but Lang's 2 eyes were failing him, as he was nearly blind at this point. He retired and returned to LA, where he died 16 years later. Billy Wilder would also return to Berlin in the early 60s with 1, 2, 3, a light comedy about the serious politics in the city. James Cagney plays, well, the capitalist of all capitalists, a man working for the Coca-Cola company in Berlin, desperate for a big promotion. But that is thrown into jeopardy when he is asked to look after his boss's daughter, and then she brings home a communist. The film isn't serious, but during production they had to move filming from Berlin to Munich because something was being built that would change the city forever. Yes, in 1961, up came the Berlin Wall. This guarded concrete wall fully separated East and West Berlin. Guard towers, defences, beds of nails and trenches were installed to stop East Germans fleeing to the west. This led to real-life drama and horror, and to many films about this literal divided city. One of the very best Cold War thrillers was based on a book by a real-life former MI6 agent, John le Carré. The Spy Who Came In From the Cold was his first book, and 2 years later an adaptation was released, starring Richard Burton as an MI6 spy who is tasked with feeding the enemy disinformation about an East German intelligence officer. Burton has to fake being dismissed from the MI6 and become a double agent, and he journeys to the other side of the wall. Of course, things are more complicated than they seem, and there is plenty of double-crossing and shocking twists, so prevalent in spy fiction. But this is one of the very best thrillers to deal with the wall, and Burton gives a suitably grumpy and bleak performance as this struggling spy. Another famous British spy would also come to Berlin. Yes, you guessed it, Harry Palmer. Yes, Michael Caine's anti-Bond starred in a very similar feeling film, Funeral in Berlin, which was based on Len Dayton's spy novel. Palmer has to cross the wall and help a colonel of the East defect. Of course, things are more complicated than they seem, and there is plenty of double-crossing and shocking twists so prevalent in spy fiction.
Guten Abend.
Guten Abend.
Now, that's an ugly customer, but here's a beauty.
I like England.
England likes you.
Girls always make passes at spies who wear glasses.
And of course, the world's most famous British spy, which is a bad thing to be in that industry, James Bond came to Berlin in 1983's Octopussy, where Roger Moore's ever-aging super spy is tasked with stopping a Soviet general who is stealing Fabergé eggs. But of course, things are more complicated than they seem, and there is plenty of double-crossing and shocking twists so prevalent in spy fiction. And eventually Bond, dressed as a clown, has to stop a nuclear bomb from detonating at an American airbase in the West. It's maybe not the best Cold War thriller. But we did get a wonderful German Cold War thriller about spying in 2006, The Lives of Others. Partially shot at this apartment building. Set in East Berlin in 1984, we get a very Orwell-esque 1984 story with the real-life situation of Stasi agents monitoring residents of East Berlin. We follow a seemingly emotionless Stasi captain who is tasked with monitoring a playwright who has always been seen as pro-communist and is not known for dissent. The Stasi agent discovers that he has really been tasked with monitoring him as the Minister of Culture is romantically interested in the playwright's actress girlfriend. The Stasi agent starts to question whether what he is doing is right. He begins to feel for the couple, and he begins to change. It is subtle and done superbly, and gradually by actor Ulrich Mühe. He is astonishing in the film. The film has feelings of Francis Ford Coppola's The Conversation, Rear Window, and even a bit of the silly action film Equilibrium. But this is not a film about action, but about tension. It's an edge-of-your-seat spy thriller without guns and murder. An incredibly well-observed film about observation. A stunning historical drama about humanity in a time of dehumanization. About people with divided allegiances in a divided city. An astonishing film.
Bist du wirklich bei der Stasi?
Weißt du überhaupt, was das ist? Die Stasi?
Ja, das sind schlimme Männer, die andere einsperren, sagt mein Papa.
So. Wie heißt denn dein?
Mein was?
Ball. Wie heißt denn dein Ball?
Du bist aber komisch, Bälle haben doch keinen Namen.
And spies didn't just have to deal with espionage. In Possession, Sam Neill's West Berlin spy returns home from the East to find that his wife, played by Isabella Adjani, wants a divorce, and even worse than that, she's moved in with a tentacled monster. It is a brilliantly twisted film, and Adjani in particular is astonishing as the woman going down a rabbit hole of madness. Here, the divided Berlin is used to show the emotional divide between the couple. And that isn't the only horror set in Germany. The original Suspiria was set in Freiburg, but its remake was set in the divided Berlin of the 1970s. An American joins a Berlin dance company. It seems like a dream come true, but wouldn't you know it, it's a nightmare come true, as the school happens to be run by a coven of bloody witches. It is set during the German Autumn, a period in 1977 where there were attacks by the far-left militant group, the Red Army faction. The country was struggling with guilt from World War II, and those emotions appear in the film, with lead characters being Holocaust survivors, and showing that evil was still in control of certain establishments. But not all of the horror films set in the divided city had deep themes running through them. The 1985 Italian horror film Demons has German students going to the cinema and then being attacked by demons. It's a brilliantly silly, gory picture.
Rosemary? Are you okay?
It is set at the Metropolis, but during that time, this fantastic building was really a music venue and was shown in a quite different film, not about demons, but about angels. One of the greatest Berlin set films, Wim Wenders' Wings of Desire. And in the film, Nick Cave plays at the Metropolis, where he is watched by Bruno Ganz's angel. In this mostly black and white film, we follow Ganz as he wanders around Berlin, watching the lives and listening to the thoughts of its inhabitants. It's a city full of isolated people going through personal struggles. It starts with Ganz staring down at the streets filled with Berliners atop the Kaiser Wilhelm Memorial Church, a church that was partially destroyed in 1943 and was never fully repaired, its damaged spire remaining, a reminder of the destruction, but also of hope. So it is only fitting that an angel in Berlin stand atop its spire. He views many people over the course of the film, including Columbo himself, Peter Falk, playing himself, making a film about the city's past and the Nazis, a reminder that the memory of the brutal past is never far away. Unlike the humans, the angels can go between the West and East. They silently watch the locals, but things change when Ganz's angel begins to fall in love with a trapeze artist working in a circus. He decides to give up immortality and experience what it feels like to be alive and in colour. And what better to do when alive in Berlin than go on a date and experience the excellent nightlife? And Berlin is a hell of a place to listen to music, with many great musicians considering it a second home, including Nick Cave and David Bowie, who would appear in the 1981 biographical film Christiane F, about a 14-year-old girl who becomes addicted to heroin in the Bahnhof Zoo area of West Berlin. It's a brutal film to watch, showing the horrors of drug addiction while being filmed in hip areas of Berlin and with a hell of a soundtrack. We're with the protagonist every step as she falls deeper and deeper into addiction, and we understand her self-destructive choices. Natascha Brunkhorst is astonishing in it. There is not the cliched moment where she is no longer a child anymore and she's lost her innocence. She is vulnerable throughout, and you desperately want to see her get out from under the drug, making the moments where she slips that much more painful. This has to be one of the best depictions of heroin addiction ever put on screen, and a look at the lost lives of many a young Berliner to this drug. Berlin has also, through its cabaret and nightlife scene, been ahead of the curve within the LGBTQ world. 1983's City of Lost Souls is a German musical with drag queens and transgender people singing and dancing. It is about US and other international cabaret performers who arrive in Berlin to perform but struggle in their private lives. This is a low-budget, semi-pornographical punk musical that was really ahead of its time. And then there was the American musical Hedwig and the Angry Inch from John Cameron Mitchell, who adapted the movie from his own stage production. In it he plays Hedwig, an East German singer-songwriter touring the States. The character was born in East Berlin and feels stuck there until they meet an American sergeant who says he can get them across the wall. But he insists, for it to work, Hedwig will need sex reassignment surgery. The surgery is botched, leaving Hedwig with an angry inch. Well, this is quite bad timing. Upon arriving while watching the news, something major was happening back in Berlin. Yes, one of the most important dates in Berlin history, November 9th, 1989, the day the wall came down. Berlin was once again united. But even to this day, the two sides have very distinct characteristics and feelings to them. And how was this new city captured in cinema? Well, one of the best films to capture this sudden change to daily life in an amusing way was Goodbye Lenin, filmed at this apartment block behind me. The film stars the fantastic Daniel Brühl. He lives in East Berlin with his mother, who is a staunch supporter of the East. She falls into a coma and a few months later wakes up after the wall has fallen. To protect her from this shocking news that could worsen her condition, Brühl tries to keep it a secret and pretend that communism and the wall hasn't collapsed. The film deals with the legacy of the wall in a humorous and moving way. And when it came out in 2003, it even led to some nostalgia, the term used for nostalgia for the GDR. Another film known to have led to this feeling was Sonnenallee, a 1999 comedy about youth life in 1970s East Berlin and how pop music and art helped the youth of the day. But what about this new joined-up city? How has that been seen in cinema? Well, one of the best German films of the late 20th century was Run Lola Run. This fast-paced, highly inventive film has Franka Potente running to save her boyfriend. She has only 20 minutes to get 100,000 Deutschmarks. We see the butterfly effect in 3 different timelines, showing how minor changes and choices can lead to very different outcomes indeed. This is a stylish look at chance and fate, and is a great look at Berlin in the late 1990s. Franka would turn up in the Jason Bourne franchise, and Bourne himself would appear in Berlin in 2004's The Bourne Supremacy. The world of espionage is very different since the Cold War, and Matt Damon's Bourne embodies this change. There isn't the glamour of Bond. This is black ops and assassinations in a world of mass surveillance, and Bourne is fighting for freedom and privacy. And in the second film we see Bourne in Alexanderplatz and other areas of Berlin as he is framed for murder. And this new political climate was also explored in another 2004 film, The Educators, from Hans Weingartner, again with Daniel Brühl, who was one of 3 anti-capitalists who use non-violent methods. Weingartner had himself in his youth been an activist who deplored violent methods, saying that the Red Army faction had caused more damage to the left wing of the country as it gave police more power. The film is about the rich-poor divide in the city, and let's face it, the world as a whole. And we may as well stay with Daniel Brühl for a thriller based on real events. The Fifth Estate, in which he and Benedict Cumberbatch played Daniel Domshay Berg and WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange respectively, and show them working together to try and force the privileged and powerful to take account for their actions. They expose government secrets and corporate crimes. The real story is fascinating. The film, not so much. But again, let's stay with Daniel Brühl, who starred as the main villain in Captain America Civil War, where the city is used to symbolize the split up in the Avengers, leading to an epic fight at the airport. And Berlin has popped up in quite a few action films of late. John Wick was here in John Wick Chapter 4, and at some point it was said there might be a crossover with him and Charlize Theron's protagonist from Atomic Blonde, a Cold War Berlin set, heavily stylized action picture. And while I spend one more night in this astonishing city for nightlife, we have our last film about nightlife of Berlin, 2015's Victoria, a single-take film following a woman who gets caught up with local criminals and has an increasingly wild night out. And so my time in this amazing city comes to an end, and I think about what the future holds for this city. Well, we can, for the final time, go back to the master Fritz Lang, who showed us the future in one of the most influential films of all time, Metropolis, which is set in 2026. This was not only monumentally influential for the look of future cityscapes, but it also saw a lot of what was to come. The rich living in the high-rise Tower of Babel, with pleasure gardens and a life of luxury, and the poor living in the subterranean workers' city. A world where AI begins to manipulate the masses. A world where a great flood is set to destroy the poorest. Anyway, you get the picture. Fritz Lang and so many other German directors were leading the future of film in the 1920s. And Berlin was at the heart of this movement. The city went through a lot. That wonderful cinematic movement took place on the shaky bridge between an empire that collapsed and a nightmare that followed. Jobs vanished, desperation moved in, extremists goose stepped forward with simple answers and loud voices. Hate took over, which led to the almost total destruction of Berlin. The city was rubble and smoke. The war ended, but peace didn't start. It just changed clothes. The city was divided, and in 1961, concrete went up, and for 30 years the city lived like that. Then, 1989, the wall cracked. Berlin today is one city again, but it remembers it all. The history of this city can be felt on the streets. It might be why it's such a wonderful place for a night out. Berlin doesn't party to escape life. It parties because it has already suffered the worst of it.
Auf Wiedersehen. A bientôt.